Hello everybody, I'm back. It's been a minute since I've been live. How's everybody doing out there? Um, it's been a while and it's been an interesting couple of weeks. And so I know many of you, probably like me, have been feeling like the world's gone a little crazy in the last 2 weeks. And so, hi Nikki. And so, like many of you, I kind of needed some time to process and regroup and really try to figure out what this looks like moving forward and how I can kind of reframe the work that I feel like I was put on the planet to do. And so I thought today, being Transgender Day of Remembrance, was a really appropriate and significant day to jump back into the work. And so on this video, I want to tell you all a little bit about Transgender Day of Remembrance, because I know some folks probably don't even know what the heck I'm talking about. I'm going to share with you a little bit about why I think it's important, and then also share with you a thought that I have had, just kind of about baby steps so we can all start taking. It feels right now, I think, really overwhelming, like there's so much work to do in so many different directions and so many different communities. And so I think that has felt overwhelming, and I've seen a couple of posts today that have been really, that have really resonated with me in terms of the idea of, rather than letting that overwhelm stop us and paralyze us a bit, which I feel like that has done for me for the past 2 weeks, really taking the action that we can, like in the different ways that we can. Mitten's invested in this conversation too, evidently. But really taking the kind of action that we can in the ways that we can and in the manner that we can. For some of us, that's going to be going out in the street and, making our voices heard. And for some of us, that's going to be, writing maybe and sharing with people. For some of us, it's going to be having face-to-face conversations with family members that we've not navigated before, or maybe that we haven't navigated in a really long time because we just said, whatever, they're going to live their life, I'm going to live my life, and we'll be fine. And now we're finding out that that's not necessarily going to work. And so I just have really appreciated seeing that and giving everyone kind of the space to show up in the way that we can. I think the most important thing is that we show up. Oftentimes we can get really caught up in being critical of each other and how we're doing the work. And I think the most important thing right now is simply that we are doing the work. So, after spending my own time kind of trying to figure out what my message was going to be tonight, I thought it was important to talk about Transgender Day of Remembrance. And like I said, I feel like there are a lot of people who have no idea what Transgender Day of Remembrance is. And so for those of you who are not familiar with Transgender Day of Remembrance, or TDOR for short, it was first recognized in 1998 by a woman who was a dear friend of a woman named Rita Hester. And Rita Hester was a trans woman who was murdered. And to this day, almost 18 years later, her murder is still unsolved. And it was a project that was initially created online called Remembering Our Dead. And it was to recognize people who have been lost to violence because of transphobia. And so there's actually a website that you can go to. If you Google Transgender Day of Remembrance, or if you go to, I think it's tdor.info, you'll find the page there. And it lists all of the names of the people who have been identified and the murders that have been reported over the last year. And so every November 20th, we remember those folks. And so today, Ethan and I were honored to be part of our church service, in which we actually we helped in reading the names of the trans people in Michigan who had lost their lives to transphobia this year that we know of, because again, these numbers are just those that are reported and that are reported as hate crimes. So There were 24 in the state of Michigan, and there were nearly 300, I think, internationally. A vast majority of those are trans women. A vast majority of those are trans women of color. And so it's important because, one, people don't know about it, and people need to know about it. And I just really believe, and I think that I think most people believe that we shouldn't be punished. No one should be punished for simply being who they truly are. I mean, we were created to come into this life experience and to experience life, good and bad, and to be who we are and to be authentic. And so, you know, that shouldn't be happening to anyone. And, you know, sometimes people, I think, have a hard time getting their mind around gender, and particularly transgender identity, or, you know, a gender identity that doesn't align with one's physical body. But I had this thought the other day in the shower, and I don't know how accurate this is because, again, I'm speaking from a cisgender perspective. But with the experience that I've had in doing this work and all of the different people that I've met and the different experiences I've had of people going through this themselves, the kind of analogy that came to me in the shower was this idea of, like, for people who maybe have never experienced gender dissonance for themselves, if you can imagine, like, think about your personality. If you tend to be an extrovert, as we say, like outgoing, extrovert, really gregarious, like that's just your personality, right? Or maybe you're on the other end of the spectrum. Maybe you're someone who's a little more reserved, considers themselves more of an introvert, likes their kind of quiet time, you know, kind of shy. Can you, if somebody were to ask you, explain why you're that way? Can you explain why you're so outgoing and bubbly and over the top all the time? Or can you explain why you tend to be more reserved, or maybe you're not, you know, don't like to be around a lot of people? Like, most of us can't explain that about ourselves. We know it about ourselves. If we're, you know, really self-aware, we know either we really like to be around a lot of people or we like our time to ourselves. But if someone were to ask me, you know, why are you like that? I don't know. It's just who I am, right? Like, there's probably lots of things about you that maybe you know about yourself and you know who you are, and there's no doubt about it, who you are. But if someone were to ask you to explain it, you probably couldn't, right? And what if, to take it a step further, people said, you can't be that way. You have to stop being outgoing. You have to be quiet. You have to be reserved. You have to act a particular way. Or vice versa. Again, if you're more introverted and people are like, why are you so quiet? Why are you so quiet? And to be fair, some of us probably get this, right? Some of us who are a little bit outgoing and over the top, sometimes people might say to you like, wow, you're a lot, you know? Or if I'm, you know, really reserved and really quiet, oftentimes people will, you know, really try to make small talk with you a lot or try to get you to talk, and think about how that feels. And so for some reason in my mind, in the shower where I have my best thoughts, this seemed like a reasonable analogy to try to use for folks who just can't get their mind around the gender thing. Because in some ways, you experience the same kind of things. And even in some ways, you experience those things around gender, right? Because I think that there are stereotypes about the kind of personality we should have based on what our gender is. And so it's freaking complicated, right? Like, this stuff is all freaking complicated because it's all wrapped up in each other. So anyway, I offer that analogy for anyone who maybe just struggles with understanding trans identity and or gender non-conformity or gender fluidity, because, you know, we don't all experience it, but it doesn't mean we can't work really hard to understand it. And this gets to my point about why this day is so important, is no one should be experiencing the kind of oppression that people are experiencing just for simply being who they are. And that requires a lot of us to learn to allow for other people to be who they are, right? And it's something I'm still trying to figure out how it goes in this work. But I really, really, truly believe in the law of allowing and this idea that my allowing you to be who you are in no way prevents me from being who I am. And it sounds complicated, and in my mind, it still is a little bit complicated because it begs the question about, well, how if we're at odds, if you're at odds with who I am, how is that going to work? But that's the thing. The whole law of allowing is that you aren't at odds with other people, how other people are, who other people are. You allow them to be who they are. So I won't get too deep into that because we could be here all night. But I just wanted to offer that as an explanation because I know that I've had, sorry, I'm getting a little emotional, but I've had a couple of people in my family reach out to me since I started doing these videos, people that I've never talked to about any of this, who have expressed enthusiasm about understanding and about learning about it. And so, although I didn't intend to go this deep into this, I wanted to offer that because I feel like if they're looking for that, then there's other people who might also be looking for that. So the other thing that I want to say about Transgender Day of Remembrance, and I guess really not even so much about TDOR as much as about transphobia, is that I believe that transphobia as well as homophobia is rooted deeply in sexism and misogyny. Because if you've heard me talk about this before, or you've heard me say that when people get upset or like harass people or bully people about it's usually about gender expression. Like if a kid on the playground is being bullied and being called, the F word or gay or, that kind of thing, they're not getting at that he likes boys necessarily as much as he's not acting like a boy, right? Like people don't get upset about who you love. Some people will argue that's what they're getting upset about. But mostly, I think it's that people get upset about being uncomfortable with how we're being in the world. We're not fitting their stereotype of what a boy is or what a girl is. And so I really believe that it's rooted in that. It's rooted in this idea of, particularly for little boys, that you're not acting like a boy. And I think that that's also why trans women tend to be much more vulnerable when it comes to, the names of TDOR every year after year after year, is overwhelmingly trans women and overwhelmingly trans women of color. And I think it has to do with misogyny. And I see your question, Nikki, thank you. What does misogyny mean? Misogyny is the general hatred of women or belief that women are less than. And so where that plays a role is that, people can't begin to understand why a man would want to be like a woman. And so going back to my example of about why kids are, bullied on the playground, it's this idea of like, you're a boy, you're not supposed to cry, you're supposed to be tough, you're supposed to be rough, you're supposed to, defend yourself. Like there's all of these stereotypes about what it means to be a boy. And when you don't fit that, if you're acting like a girl, people can't get their mind on that. You're weak, or there's all of these stereotypes. And so I just really feel like those two, they're interlinked. And so ultimately, the irony of this is that even within the LGBT community, the LGBT or the LGB folks, lesbian, gay, bisexual folks, some of those folks have a hard time getting their mind around the trans thing, and sometimes are divisive within our community. And the irony to this, in my mind, is that if we can figure out how to love and embrace our trans siblings, we can help solve the problem for everyone, because we're all trapped by that. We're all trapped by this idea that women are supposed to behave one way and men are supposed to behave the other, and that there's this hierarchy, of power. And if we can love and embrace gender nonconforming people and allow people to be who they are, then it breaks the boxes for everyone, right? Like it breaks it for everybody. And so if we could just recognize that, our oppression is interconnected, that the same thing that puts trans people at risk also puts us at risk, but not nearly to such an extent. It's almost like I had written this thought down earlier that it's almost as if these trans women have become the ultimate sacrifice for our tolerance of everyday sexism and misogyny. Because although those acts of violence are the word is escaping me. Although those acts of violence are a huge action, and sexism and misogyny are so insidious. It's in everything. But there's a part of me that believes that that's part of the problem, is it's in everything. So when we don't address those small things, it's like a drop in the teacup, right? The drop in the teacup, the drop in the teacup. Those small things are a drop in the teacup until finally the teacup is full. Like nothing stops that momentum. And so ultimately, our trans women of color are paying the ultimate price for what we put up with in our country. And I think it's safe to say we put up with it in our country. When you look at the numbers from the election, 53% of women voted for a leader who spewed sexism and misogyny, who was accused of sexual assault. And I think it was 53% of white women, the majority, voted for him. And, I don't want to make this all about the election, but it speaks to what I'm talking about. This idea that sexism and misogyny are insidious. It's in everything we do. And so much so that there are things, like you said, Nikki, I see your comment there. It happens so regularly that we don't always recognize it. We don't even recognize it. We don't hear it. As women, we don't hear it. We don't recognize it. We don't stop it. And so something that I have experienced in the last 2 weeks has been that it feels like those kinds of things are just like magnified to me. Like the things that I had a consciousness about, but we're not constantly seeing. It's like now it's like everything's right here. It's loud. It's bright. Everything is right here. And so I have caught so many things, even just in our common language. And so this is the point that I was going to leave us with in terms of maybe trying to take like a first step. And that is paying attention to our language. I believe that language is important. I believe that language is powerful. I believe that part of the reason that we have such a hard time moving in making progress in the LGBT community or for the LGBT community is because people are afraid of saying the wrong thing. I think that's the case probably, again, in a lot of situations, in a lot of communities. Straight people or cisgender people are afraid of saying the wrong thing about LGBTQ people or about their relationship to that. White people are afraid to talk about race, right? Christians are maybe afraid to engage in conversations about other religions. Like, we are afraid of saying the wrong thing. Even people who are well-intentioned are often afraid of saying the wrong thing. And so to me, language is important. And some people may call it being too sensitive or being politically correct, but ultimately it's part of our culture. And so what I would challenge us to do is to start paying attention to those things, to start seeing the signs of what's happening in our culture, because until we can really see it, we can't really take good action to try to overcome it. And so, maybe you're not to a point yet where you're necessarily comfortable addressing what you hear, but maybe the first step is just acknowledging what you're hearing. So, for example, I was at a meeting this past week with a mixed group of people, mixed gender, is what I mean about that. There were men and women in the room. And it was a very, safe, progressive group, like, just a mastermind group. And it was a great, great safe space. I love that group. And I just noticed, this is just an example of something I heard, like when somebody addressed the group, they said, okay, guys, it's, went on with what they were saying. And I didn't take great offense to it because, again, I know that, it's just in some places it's like regional vernacular. I've said you guys, right? Like I'm from Michigan. It's kind of the language we use. But it kind of came up on my radar that the majority of the people in the room were women. And if you addressed a mixed room of people, a room full of, men and women, if you addressed them all as ladies, do we think that would fly? I don't think it would. And so again, I get that in some level it's vernacular, and at the same time, you're calling I'm certain there have been situations where there have been only women in the room and we've been called guys. So that's my point, right? Is like language is important and it's powerful. And so that was one of the situations where I observed it, and I did not address it in the situation. Although it did cross my mind to kind of joke about it because they know the work that I do, and to be able to address it in a way that was not, confrontational. I don't think it has to be. In fact, I think it can't be. Like, I think if we're really going to make any kind of progress and really find common ground, it can't be confrontational. It's got to be, it doesn't have to be lighthearted all of the time. But I think that there's got to be a decorum about, how you talk about it. And I think even just raising the awareness of it. I think I could have stayed safely in that group, probably made some comment about the use of the word guys. I chose not to because I think I was still kind of processing in my mind that all of these things are coming up for me. Because this is just one example. Over the past 2 weeks, it's been lots of different things that I have witnessed or seen where I'm just like, wow, that either scream sexism or racism or, just problematic things, and trying to process how to deal with that. So Nikki, I see that. What is okay, folks, ladies and gentlemen? That's a great question. There's a lot of oftentimes people say, well, how do I address a mixed group of people in a way that's inclusive? Or maybe, especially if I don't necessarily know someone's identity, if I'm not sure if they identify as male or female in the group. So folks is a good one. I got in the habit when I was in Georgia of saying y'all, because again, that's just a regional vernacular there. But I use friends a lot. I'll say friends, okay, everyone's a good example. So there's ways to do it. There's ways to address the group. It's really just a matter of getting out of patterns that we're just used to and that have no ill intention, right? They have no ill intention. It's just what I kind of would call like unconscious exclusion, because you're not thinking about the language you're using, but the language we're using is not inclusive. So that is kind of, I guess, my thought for the night in terms of trying to start to take first steps, trying to make sense of where we're at now and the work that needs to be done. And certainly there's, like I said, work in every direction. And I'm going to keep reminding myself that the important thing is to show up, because I think it's very easy to feel overwhelmed and to disengage and to check out. And I think that now more than ever, it's so important that we show up. So with that, this message or this Facebook Live went way longer than I anticipated, but that seems to be kind of the pattern for me. So I guess I will give myself grace on that. But thank you so much for all of you who tuned in. There were lots of folks I saw. I don't know if I've figured this out yet. I can't really see the names unless you comment. So I've only seen Nikki's comments. I've seen a couple of people check in, Tony, and I don't know if you're still here, but I really appreciate you tuning in, and I hope that you'll continue to do so, because my hope is that I can engage people in dialogue. I feel like that's been something that I have really enjoyed doing and have kind of a gift for connecting with people around this, especially people who maybe are not necessarily comfortable having this conversation. So I hope you'll continue to tune in. I'm going to try to get back to a regular video and get to work doing some work. So with that, let me see, Nikki, just think the universe is pouring this experience and awareness into you. Oh, thank you, Nikki. Thank you so much for your help too. I love you. All right, with that, I'm going to sign off, and hopefully I will talk to you all again sometime soon.